Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all of you. Again, my name is Tineke Oenema. I am the Executive Secretary of UN Nutrition, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this event. I already shared some housekeeping rules with you, but most importantly for you to know is that you're in the right side event, namely the one about healthy diets at the nexus of food systems, biodiversity, climate, and nutrition. Global summits, local transformation, and the CFS voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition. So what we are going to do today is explore together the operationalization of the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, the operationalization around climate, nutrition, agriculture, and diets, and of course, all in the context of food systems. We will specifically look at local experiences and local actors, because as you know, these nexus, that connection between these several items, these several sectors, are very visible at the local level. Also, this side event is a good opportunity to share experiences, to share lessons, and to show that the technical availability is there. And maybe at the end, we will also hear in this context about the FAO platform that was launched this morning. We will learn about policy making, and we will learn about the opportunities to share our experiences, and even more importantly, to join our actions to make these issues a reality, to make that connection really work at country level. We have a list of excellent speakers and panelists today, both active at headquarter level, but also more importantly, very active in a few countries. We have representatives from Ethiopia, India, and Central America. But before we go to these country level experiences, I would like to invite Julian Lampietti, who is the manager for global engagement at the Agriculture and Food Global Practice at the World Bank, to share with us some welcome and opening remarks. Julian, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Steineke, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those connecting to the Committee on World Food Security's 49th session. Thank you for joining. So my name is Julian Lampietti, and I'm the manager of the Global Engagement Unit of the Agriculture and Food Practice at the World Bank. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this side event, Healthy Diets at the Nexus of Food Systems, Biodiversity, Climate, and Nutrition, Global Summits, Local Transformation, and the CFS Voluntary Guidelines on Food Systems and Nutrition. This event is led by UN Nutrition and is co-organized by the World Bank together with our partners, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Food Programme. We are in urgent need of food systems transformation. Food systems have fed a growing population, but the cost is unsustainable. Current food systems encroach on natural habitats, pollute the planet, exacerbate rural poverty, and underlie ill health and disease. While global food systems have a market value of $10 trillion per year, these food systems generate hidden health, environmental, and social costs estimated at up to 12 trillion annually. This makes it imperative to transform food systems towards healthy people, healthy planet, and healthy economies. This year, 2021, marks a unique opportunity to build momentum, commitment, and action for food systems transformation. We are at a crossroads, one with an exceptional confluence of various global dialogues. In September, the world convened the UN Food System Summit. This week, the UN Biodiversity Conference, or COP15, is concurrently taking place with CFS 49. At the end of this month, the UK will host the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, or COP26. And in December, Japan will host the Nutrition for Growth Summit. Put together, the various summits build global clamor for holistic action on food systems transformation. The CFS voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition is a central thread across these summits. The guidelines provide a frame for food systems action on governance, food supply chains, access to diets, food safety, consumer education, women's empowerment, and resilience in humanitarian contexts. At the core of the guidelines is their purpose: to deliver healthy diets through sustainable food systems. And the strength of the guidelines comes out of a broad and careful multi-stakeholder consultation and negotiation process. We recognize that a global food system transformation will be driven by local action. Local action must be grounded, excuse me, on local evidence and local experiences. A one-size-fits-all approach will not work. We know, for example, that what it means to shift towards sustainable and healthier diets differs from one country to another. To aid policymakers in addressing the myriad of food challenges in the system, more and better evidence at the local level is needed on what diet should look like. We also recognize that local evidence cannot be generated in a vacuum, nor can local evidence be translated into any meaningful action without engaging the full range of food system stakeholders. Local experiences and local voices must be heard. CFS provides a unique platform to elevate a range of voices towards broad consensus. Like through CFS 49, the CFS brings together civil society and practitioners with governments and the private sector. Similarly, in Ethiopia, the government set up a transformative roadmap for Ethiopian food systems endorsed by both the Ministries of Agriculture and Health, and launched together with results and recommendations from the Fill the Nutrient Gap situation analysis, an analysis which uses metrics to identify levers for change across food, health, and social protection systems. This event is an exciting opportunity to link the global summits on biodiversity, on climate, and on nutrition, to build local evidence for food systems trajectories, and to elevate a range of voices and encourage broad exchange. I look forward to our discussion today, and I look forward to our shared journey towards healthy, sustainable food for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. This was really compelling already, those opening words. Thank you for connecting the dots between the sectors, but also already for connecting between these global events. And reminding us, by the way, how you started off by mentioning the costs that cost us in dollars, but also the human cost and the environmental cost. Extremely important to keep that in mind as well. Triple types of costs. Global processes, yes. Global summits, it's important. We need to engage with these global summits. But as you already mentioned, these global summits need to be built on and informed by local action, local information, and local evidence. Speaking of, I'd like to introduce Dr. Saskia de Pey from World Food Programme, who is the Chief of Analytics and Science for Food and Nutrition. Saskia, please guide us and inform us about local level and country level evidence and information and how that can help us to transform food systems. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Stineke. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, colleagues. Very pleased to present to you today. So what I'd like to speak about is how do we inform food system transformation pathways? What evidence do we have globally? What evidence do we have locally? And how can we tailor these pathways to the needs and the possibilities of countries? So I think we all know the Eat Lancet Planetary Health Diet, which was proposed as a sort of a framework to have a target for a diet produced by food systems in a way that would be sustainable and that would provide for health. Important to note that the diet and its diversity was really based on the global burden of disease findings on the relationship between dietary intake and non-communicable disease. From how diverse it is, it should in principle also meet the nutrient needs throughout the life cycle. But a closer examination of that shows that it wouldn't in all cases. And the reason is that it was that evidence-based it was used to formulate the diet. Another point that's important is that it was formulated to stay within planetary boundaries, but that would not only come from a dietary change, but also from a change of production methods. Then if we take a closer look at what that dietary change would entail, we see, as Julian also mentioned, that in many countries, all the countries in blue here, adoption of that Eat Lancet diet would decrease the greenhouse gas emissions. But for the countries in red, adopting that diet would actually increase the emissions. So this just shows that the starting point compared to the target will tell you whether diets increase in diversity and increase or decrease in their greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, the animal source foods are a major driver of the higher levels of emissions today compared to the Eat Lancet in countries where that consumption is high. Another important point to take into account is the affordability of diets. So these are the findings from the SOFI report. And there we see that the healthy diet is unaffordable for at least 3 billion people. And this was based on 2017 price and income data. Since COVID, that has further worsened. And the Eat Lancet diet is also around the price level of that healthy diet. And you can see in the table below that in low-income countries, 86% would not be able to afford the lowest cost healthy diet. So there's a long way to go to change the food system so that it provides for the levels of diverse foods and the quantities that are required, but also to do so at a price level that is more affordable for people. So with that, we like to take a closer look at different countries. Where is the cost point of the diet? What is the greenhouse gas emissions? What are the nutrient needs? So what is the health and nutrition situation? Is the undernutrition? What is that like? How much of that intake needs to be improved to prevent undernutrition, micronutrient deficiencies? What's overweight and obesity like? And then with that, assess how are current diets unhealthy? Do they include many unhealthy foods? Or is their diversity so low that for that reason, they are not promoting good health? And what does the environmental footprint of a diet in a country look like? And then based on that analysis, set longer term goals and prepare a trajectory, both for the supply and the demand side of the food system. We should not forget that it also entails a lot of change of people's habitual diets. So I'm going to share findings from two countries, from Ethiopia and Indonesia, where we have looked at the diet. What is the current diet and how does that compare to what we're looking at here for Ethiopia is the OECD diet, so high income countries dietary profile, the Eat Lancet diet, and then the current national average, rural and urban average. And furthest to the right, diets optimized to meet nutrient needs at the lowest possible cost. And you can see that today's diets in Ethiopia are much less diverse than both Eat Lancet and high income country diets. And that within the diversity that is there, the choices differ between those optimized for nutrient intake and low cost and current diet. So then, of course, we're curious, what do the greenhouse gas emissions for those scenarios look like? That's what we see here. So what the black dotted line is Ethiopia's 2030 goal. And you can see that the current diets in Ethiopia are below that goal. And you can see that Eat Lancet is like twice higher, and the OECD diet is many-fold higher. What you can also see is that it was possible with the lowest cost nutrient adequate diet to stay below the target. But you can also see that the today's consumption, there is quite a lot of greenhouse gas emission from specific animal source food. So other animal source foods were selected for the optimized diets. So this is good to keep in mind for how to change food demand such that we can stay within planetary boundaries and meet health and nutrition goals. We've done a similar work for Indonesia, which just got published last month, where we are comparing the current diet, an adjustment because of the overestimation of calories, which has different causes that I'm not going into. Then we have optimized diets, meeting nutrient needs at the lowest possible cost, the Eat Lancet diet, and then also 3 diets that are a variation to the current diet, by excluding dairy foods, by having animal source foods, but just the lower cost items, fish and poultry, and also eggs and a little bit of dairy, and a low food chain diet. So it's more plant-based with a few animal source foods, insects, sardines with a low environmental footprint. And then the same cost and nutrient optimized diets for different members of the family, just to see where the optimized household, what that is based on. So you can see a bit similar to Ethiopia, that the diversity is higher of the optimized diets, the Eat Lancet diet, compared to current diet. So here are the greenhouse gas emissions for those scenarios. And we see that those that meet nutrient needs and the Eat Lancet diet with the highest diversity amongst them all, they had the higher greenhouse gas emissions. Current diet, 50% comes from rice. And then in the other diets, it's really the different animal source foods to different extents contributing those. Also here, I'm not showing the OECD diet, but that is like 2.5-fold higher than the Eat Lancet one. And as I said, when the Eat Lancet set their target, they also included changes of production methods, which we didn't include yet in this analysis because we didn't have good scenarios to include. Here we're comparing for these different diets, which one is good for greenhouse gas emissions, water, they were all good, cost of the diet, and nutritional value. And we would like to see a dietary scenario that goes across the top for all these axes, and we don't see it. So it means that there are to be trade-offs and further optimization to be made to get to diets that are healthy, nutritious, sustainable, and affordable. So what do we get from these 2 analyses for these trajectories of food system transformation? First of all, both diets have a low to a very low diversity. So they don't meet nutrient requirements. And they also have relatively low greenhouse gas emissions, lower than the Eat Lancet diet, which is basically because of their low diversity and low amount of animal source foods. And actually that amount is a bit too low for certain groups in the population in particular. So to improve nutrition and health, dietary diversity must increase. We must meet those nutrient needs and have that dietary diversity for good health. So the non-affordability must come down, which means that prices should be lower and income should be higher, so that people have more choice that they can make. And then within that choice, they should be nudged to make the healthier choices. And their institutional demand can play a role towards change of the supply, because there is a demand and it can support the most vulnerable. For animal source foods, they are needed, but in moderate amounts, to increase that dietary diversity, and because they are such a rich source of specific nutrients. But I also want to emphasize the moderate point, and the choice and production that needs to be such that we don't have more than required, and that we have it optimized such that the impact remains limited. So that comes to the production methods. They need to be more climate and environmentally friendly. And it's important to realize that if a diet were only based on plant source foods, the diversity must be even higher than when it also includes some animal source food. And still there is a risk of deficiency of specific nutrients, which are mainly provided by animal source foods. But of course, we have another option that we can also add to the mix, which is fortification. And that can be to compensate for some of the limitations of diversity, which can be there for different reasons, unaffordability, religious reasons, and of course the environmental impact reasons. So yeah, having done this analysis and doing F&G analyses in many countries, we really see the value of comprehensive analytical tools. So we're building Enhance to also include environmental indicators and healthy diet criteria to really support governments and stakeholders to identify food system transformation pathways to ultimately get to sustainable, healthy diets, working both on the supply and on the demand side. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the country examples that we'll hear.
Thanks so much, Saskia. I really enjoyed listening to you, and I particularly liked you used the word diversity, you know, once every sentence or once every second sentence at least. So as a nutritionist and being in favor of diets that are both sustainable and healthy, diversity is and should be a keyword. The way you show diversity is so interesting, because when we are speaking about, you know, diets and their impact on climate gas, we always think that if you shift the diet, the emission should go down, but you clearly show that sometimes it goes up when you change dietary patterns. And I also think it's important to keep those trade-offs in mind, you know, health, environment, affordability. There's really a need to look carefully what is the context to determine what a diet should look like and how to take into account these trade-offs. And trade-offs, of course, can be minimized when you optimize diets, when you optimize production systems and methods. Okay. I really look forward now to hear from our panelists. I hope we have 3 panelists, but I do know that one of our panelists had issues to connect. But nevertheless, we will continue for the time being. We will have 2 or hopefully 3 speakers. The first one would be Ms. Kavita from India, who is the country representative from Swiss Aid. We would also have Dr. Reinhold Muschler, who is the director of the Division for Research and Research, Education and Inclusive Development at CATI in Central America, in Costa Rica. And hopefully we will have in the course of our debate also Mr. Mandrefo Nigusi from Ethiopia, who is leading on the Agricultural Transformation Agency in that same country. So welcome to the 3 of you.
Sorry, I joined since the beginning, so I am Mandefro.
Ah, welcome. Well, thank you sorry, very much for making that known. I wasn't aware, my apologies, but I'm very pleased to know that we have our complete panel. So if you're ready then, Mr. Mandarefo, I would like to start off with you then, if you agree. So you are, as I said, you are leading the Agriculture Transformation Agency of Ethiopia. And how, I would like to ask you, how does Ethiopia's roadmap for food system transformation, because that is indeed the topic, we need to transform our food systems, but how do you see Ethiopia's roadmap for food system transformation, considering the role of diets and their links with biodiversity, climate, and nutrition? And I'm very much aware you're from an agriculture institute, but I kind of tease you to speak now on diets and nutrition. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. My apology. You know, when you were making a remark about you are waiting for a panelist, I thought you are waiting for somebody else, not me. So my apology for that. And so in terms of healthy diet, I would say healthy diet is a mirror image of the health system, which very much goes with, you know, the prosperity, the level of development of a particular country. Ethiopia, as a developing nation, yes, we have the roadmap for the food system. And when we see that with the lens of biodiversity, climate, and nutrition, I would like to connect that, you know, the initial thing in the healthy diet is about production enough for the community or for the society. Then that might go with a quantitative figure in terms of amount of production, and then comes in the quality of production, which goes with healthy diet in terms of balancing the different nutrient composition for various ages of a human being. So the initial focus is on production of crop, livestock, which is also associated with horticultural crops. So how do we balance this in relation to the action tracks, as well as we have this category of clusters? The healthy diet is the key element in the roadmap. And we have one specific cluster associated to the healthy diet. At this initial stage, Ethiopia as a country that cannot invest to transform its food system right away, we will follow a phased approach. So what do we do in short term? What do we do in midterm? And what do we do in the long term is what we are facing. So moving towards healthy diet from our side is about growing biofortified crops. So fortified crops, especially the dietary composition, we very much eat grains, especially cereals. And the figure from figure 2 of Sasika, we just presented, shows also that we really eat cereals. How do we bring in the different nutritive composition of cereals so that we can get healthy diet, especially for the rural community who don't have access to processed fortified foods or food stuff. So we depend on international, national, and local research so that they can really produce or develop technologies or crops that do have different composition like carbohydrate, protein, and a little bit of oil content, and in some cases vitamins. For example, CEMIT is an international maize and wheat research. They are trying to intensify the protein content of maize, as well as the vitamin A content of maize. Likewise, if we can get in pulses that kind of support, and we can test, adopt, and promote or scale this kind of holistic grain, which is easy for farmers to adopt, which is easy for the rural communities to eat. That is an area where we can explore at the initial stage of the process. Then comes in, when we have a volume being produced, a process fortification, especially the industry, the food factories. Then, that kind of product would be very much important for those who are living in towns and maybe around urban, peri-urban areas. That is a second approach where we deal in a phased approach. So narrowing down of commodities that we are working on and boosting their nutrition composition is an area of investment. Mm-hmm. And when we do this, everything related to food system is cost sensitive. And most of the countryside, or even in the urban area, the income of the community is too low. Then, who can afford really vegetable and fruits, even in the urban area? So what needs to change is the attitude of people in the rural area. For example, farmers can grow vegetables and cereals and pulses. So balancing that in the rural area so that when they consume as a self-sufficient family, that needs to happen. They need to change their mindset, their attitude. They grow leafy vegetables, they can eat, and they have a balanced diet. Secondly, production of vegetable and fruits in an intensive way. So we need to shift from mainly grain or using irrigation. We need to produce as a second crop or as a second season crop vegetables and fruits. That's the second aspect. So investment in irrigation is critical. And we should also improve our policy related to private sector. So the private sector actors do have minimum role in terms of promoting healthy diet, even production of biofortified crops and in the products. So that need to change in terms of production and processing. When we transform the food system, then sustainability is a critical issue where we take that into consideration. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Really interesting points. In fact, you started off with the point of biofortification of your staples, but then, following your points and your introduction and your speech, you mentioned many more topics and issues that are important. So not just for biofortification of the staple crops that are already there, but then also introducing second crops that are part of a healthy diet, such as vegetables and fruits, but also the enabling environment around it, like changing attitudes of the several actors that are out there, the farmers, obviously, but also the consumers and also private sector with regard to how they can also contribute. So that's really, really interesting. So I'll come back to you with a second question later on. But first now, I would like to move to our second panelist, Ms. Kavita Gandhi. And if you're ready, Ms. Gandhi, I would like to ask you, with regard to the role of local governments, the local government is responding to the needs and demands of farmers and consumers, but how can or should be responding to the needs and demands of farmers and consumers, one could say, but how can these local governments create an enabling environment for farmers to invest and operate effectively to supply these healthy foods. Can you help us out there, Kavita? Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My contributions today, I work with SwissAid, an NGO which has been working on the issue of agroecology and healthy diets. My contributions today are based on the work we have done with our local NGO partner Bitti Bhumi in Orissa. So I would like to begin by sharing a story of Sudam. Sudam is an innovative farmer from Bargarh district in Orissa. He lives in the irrigated part of the district. He remembers his childhood when he used to eat a lot of diverse food. There was a lot of diversity in his diet. They would eat 6 types of rice, 4 types of pulses, 15 types of vegetables, 20 types of uncultivated greens. And there was plenty of fruit to have from the farms and the forest. But this began to change when the family adopted the intensive farming system. And as a teenager, often there was he had to go hungry. There was very little vegetables to eat. The meals were mostly comprised of rice and sometimes a few vegetables. The family was caught in a vicious cycle of debt, and the health expenses were very high. And things began to change when Sudam adopted ecological farming. And today he is very proud that he's able to provide safe and diverse food for his family. So the point basically I wanted to make was that diversity was a part of the farming system and diversity was a part of the diet in this area. But when farmers adopted chemical agriculture, they started focusing on few crops, and the diversity in the diet went down. Alongside it, what happened was that there was this mainstream perception which they accepted, which was that millets and foraged food are inferior. So they either stopped eating it or they started eating less amounts of it. So the quality of the diet really suffered. And today, many farmers really do not know what nutritious food is. So that is one. And the second, I think if one looks at the farming system, and what really finds is that it is not really providing a good source of livelihood to the farmers. The cost of cultivation is increasing and the market prices are quite low. So what can local governments do in this scenario? One, I think it's very important to invest in consumer literacy to bring back nutritious food into the local diets. That is one. Secondly, it's very important to provide an attractive price to the farmers for their produce through public procurement. Which can then, be supplied to the local population. Third, invest in short value chains, bringing consumers and farmers into direct contact with each other. This would also require investing in farmers' collectives and women's groups so that they're able to provide a steady supply of food, healthy food to the markets. And there is a need to develop new products. There are a lot of crops in this area which have not been the focus of research or investment, like millets, moringa, amaranthus. So develop new products based on these healthy local crops. Thank you.
Thanks so much for these very nice examples, starting off with a real life example, and then explaining how the government can then support by consumer literacy price policy through public purchasing, and then promoting shorter value chains and developing new products based on what is available locally. This is really compelling and speaks at least to my my imagination, and gives me hope, because these are actions that shouldn't be too complicated. They are doable, one would say. I'd like to continue now with our third panelist, Dr. Reinhold Muschler from CATI. Reinhold, could you bring us back and explain again the great food transformation, top down, bottom up? What is the best way? And do you have possibly an example from where you're from Latin America or Costa Rica? Can you lead us? Can you provide us some good examples there?
Sure, I'll be happy to, although I realize now with the words of Kavita, she basically summarized everything. Biodiversity at all levels, that's in the end, we are biodiversity. We need to give thanks to our intestinal flora, which is an example of the biggest diversity that keeps us alive and healthy. Obviously, this question of bottom-up versus top-down approach, for the past 50 years, I think we have seen more and more of a top-down approach working through governments and through ministries and different organizations. But the indicators of environmental and human health do not particularly indicate that we are going in the right direction. And in many cases, unfortunately, there is a disconnect between certain organizations or institutions in countries where the political system does not work as well as we would like to for the public good, for different reasons. So I think we need really both approaches. And there is, as Kavita mentioned, a need for going back in some cases to some traditional roots of higher diversity. I mean, if we have today just 3 crops that provide more than 60% of energy needs of humanity, and we have like 15 or 20 crops that basically provide 90% of everything for humanity, but we have more than 12,000, and in some cases, some estimates go even above 50,000 different species that can be, that are edible. And each one of them, contains up to hundreds of varieties of different nutritional characteristics, of different environmental adaptation, of characteristics that allow them even to resist extreme climatic events. So we need to maybe think once more at a global level about how can we give more support to the field of NUS, neglected and underutilized species. In so many places, CATIE as a regional organization has been operating in this field for more than 50 years, and we have experiences from, for example, El Salvador and southern regions of Mexico that are extremely rich in different traditional crops that used to be consumed 20, 30, 40 years ago, including tree crops like the Maya nut, Brosimum alicastrum, and then chaya and amaranth leaves that can be used as spinach, etc. But people have lost somehow the tradition and the value of those crops. There has been this monoculturization of the agricultural system, and at the same time, somehow of the consumer's mind. If you go into a supermarket, you will not find 20 varieties of tomatoes, and you will certainly not find in most supermarkets of the developing countries, certainly, a diversity that reflects what can be grown and what should be grown based on ecological adaptation and nutritional profile. So to our from our perspective, it's clear that we have to work in parallel with the diversification of the food crops in the systems, the production systems, and at the same time the diversification of the diet, the plates. We have to have again the option to have fresh juices of so many tropical crops that can be provided locally. There are so many options for fermenting different traditional staples that once they are fermented and transformed using hygienic protocols and so forth, of course, they will be greatly, and their nutritional value and digestibility will be improved. And so we need to really work again on revaluing knowledge that has been lost, and how can we get this information again back into the hands of communities. And that, I think, is one of the key issues, how to work with youth groups, with women's groups, with schools at a level that connects these different sectors of agricultural production with consumer behavior, consumer protection, education, and of course initiatives of health ministries. That really we need a broader multi-actor approach, which in many cases has been lost somehow, and it has become too split, the approach. And so as a final note, at Cartier, as an academic and development organization, the implementation of projects in the region, Cartier has 13 member countries in Central and South America and the Caribbean. We have a whole sweep of projects that are being implemented and that were implemented. They look at this connection between nutrition and agricultural production, environmental sustainability, and the roles and the big challenges for the future to link adaptation and mitigation of climate change with biodiversity conservation, both for the long-term resilience of the production systems and for improving our nutritional profiles again.
Thanks so much. I mean, thank you for highlighting that importance of allowing local knowledge again to be available and accessible to local communities, but then also to make that knowledge and experiences knowledge known at global level, so that's really that connection from bottom up to top down. And also thank you for mentioning NUS, underutilized species, because I think that's really a topic that or an opportunity that is really untapped, and that we can make use of much more in, of course, always in the local context, but huge opportunity for many communities. So thank you so much. I'd like to go back to the panelists for a very quick second question, but please try to be very concise, and then we open up for the question, because I've seen them coming in through the chat. So I really like to allow all of us to try and answer some of these comments and questions. But the second question I'd like to ask to the three of you is basically the same for the three of you. This side event is in the context of the CFS and its voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition. Those guidelines were accepted, adopted in earlier this year, February. And I wonder if you can tell me a little bit how that framework or how these guidelines can help you in your work. Mr. Manfredo, can I start with you? Just a quick remark before we go into the general debate.
Yeah, thank you, Stine. The guidelines are very useful. So the way I see the guidelines in terms of implementing our roadmap, these are very important tools. The key point is we need to contextualize the guidelines on the condition and the situation of Ethiopia. So, you know, healthy diet and the relationship that it has in area where you have 1/4 or 1/5 of hungry people. If you talk about healthy diet, do you want to talk about what they should eat or what type of food I can bring in is a key question. So for Ethiopia, the guideline is very good, and it might require a little bit of contextualizing that depending on the diversity that we have, urban, peri-urban, rural. And again, although we are in general developing nation, we have rich, middle level and poor and very poor people as well. So we can contextualize and use the guideline, and in general is a very useful tool.
Excellent. Thank you so much for confirming that the tools are very useful, but also for emphasizing that they need to be contextualized. They need to be made, contextualized in your setting in Ethiopia. Kavita, would you like to join and add your comments there?
Yeah, as we said, our work focuses on agroecology, healthy diets, and sustainable livelihoods. And therefore, this allows us to deliver on the voluntary guidelines, especially the guidelines which focus on sustainable production, biodiversity, nutrition, gender, sustainable management of natural resources. We are currently, we are engaging with a large project which is called Consumption of Resilient Orphan Crops and Products for Healthier Diets. And here the focus is on linking production with market development and demand generation for nutritious orphan crops. And the voluntary guidelines talk about markets. And in this project, we are focusing on creating market contexts which allow farmers to get a fair share of the value, which help them maintain their autonomy. For example, by having farmer-consumer direct engagement, farmers selling to different local buyers, by supporting farmers to add value to their produce. So this project is a consortium project, and we are implementing this together with the researchers in the Research Institute of Organic Farming in Switzerland, FIBEL. And this project is supported by STC. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for again bringing the topic of research. It's research and it's linked to innovation, and we definitely need innovation in order to make that food system transformation a reality. Reinhold, over to you. The voluntary guidelines. What does it mean to
Thanks.
you?
For some reason, I seem to be always behind Kavita. Her mention of this initiative of orphan crops and working on them, it just, it vibes with a series of initiatives that we have. I think, yes, the voluntary guidelines, definitely it is another a landmark step in the right direction. We need to focus on the big picture, which on the one hand, we have the socioeconomic issue, not enough income to be able to afford certain healthier diets. So the issues to everything we can do to really empower local communities and producer groups to generate employment and generate additional income from transforming food locally rather than depending on massive quantities of imported foods of sometimes rather doubtful qualities in terms of pesticide residues and other negative attributes that might be linked to some. And then the other aspect really is, how can we expand the consumer protection and the environmental protection against excessive levels of synthetic chemical inputs that are so pervasive in most conventional production systems. If you think about the big players like banana plantations, pineapple plantations in Costa Rica, banana plantations, Ecuador, and so forth, you know, huge plantations of monocultures that are in many cases even individual clones, and you try to sustain them for decades in a monocultural setting, highly productive, but it is like a patient at the intensive care unit, you know, being constantly fed sugars and pesticides to maintain an artificial system that ecologically is not sustainable in the long run. So we clearly need to link more, find ways of driving a change towards healthier diets that have less chemical contaminants, and at the same time allow the production systems to become environmentally more friendly by incorporating biological corridors, ecological islands of diversity in these large monocrop situations. And in other situations like the cacao production, coffee production, working with agroforestry systems to include fruit trees and a whole sweep of other components in these systems. And then as another component mentioned to the increasing urbanization of humanity, there is a big field also of a big challenge to reintroduce urban farming, in many cases guided by agroecological principles, organic production in in different parts of cities and surrounding areas, that for which we have a lot of very positive and inspiring examples throughout Latin America of leading farms, starting from Cuba, going through Central American initiatives of small and medium-sized farms and cooperatives that really offer a great potential to analyze and extract what are the central agroecological practices that allow them to be very successful and very productive at levels that are, you know, above 10 kilograms of organic vegetables and fruits per square meter and year. This is an incredible productivity that can be obtained given very intensive and knowledge intensive management.
Thanks a lot. And indeed, these are elements that are mentioned in the voluntary guidelines. And again, that needs to be applied and contextualized to the settings that you are working in. So that's really helpful and interesting. The guidelines do also warn or call for more responsible use of pesticides and call for more diversification in production in order to support more sustainable food systems for healthy diet. So that's really, really interesting. I noticed, for me, again, I really appreciated speaking with you as agriculture specialist about nutrition. So that for me is already a big win. But now I'd like to go to some of the questions that I saw coming in. Maybe Saskia, if I may, you are not off the hook yet. I saw a question with regard related to fortification and processed foods that sometimes cause issues also, not always being positive, but also could cause public health problems. So can you reply to that comment? Can you share us a bit of how you see that, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for raising that topic. Yeah, so healthy diets, we use one word, but we really mean diets that are good for nutrition, for health. So these are attributes, meaning we must meet the nutrient levels from our diets for our body to, grow our muscles, for our brains to develop, for our immune system to be performing well. We also need other parts of food, those are not called nutrients, but are called bioactive substances, fibers, and those are in different foods. So that's why we need the diet to be diverse. You've also seen that healthy diet, which is the food-based dietary guideline diet, that has a good level of diversity and should have a good level of nutrients. But many people don't, they cannot reach that. The affordability, but also their physical access is such that they can't have such a diet. So we must have incremental steps to get to that diet. And that's where fortification is important, because it provides us with those nutrients that we don't have an adequate intake of as long as our diet isn't adequately diverse. And that economic component there, so the unaffordability, is very important. I mean, some people, they can only afford 30% of the cost of the lowest possible cost of a healthy diet. So that 70%, they don't have it, and it's not going to be easy to allow for that and to provide also that level of choice options in the food supply. So we must realize where our target is, and we must realize where currently people are and how to incrementally get there. So that's where fortified foods come in. Unhealthy processed foods, they are often much cheaper than the healthy foods, and that also is a problem with agricultural policies, with an emphasis having been on those just a few crops that provide us with at least sufficient energy, so we don't have starvation. But in that process, there has been a lack of research, a lack of development on the crops that Kavita and Reinhold mentioned. So their cost level for those that have to buy those is too high at the moment. So there needs to be a lowering of those costs, which to some extent lie in production ways of producing that can cost less. And then that becomes more possible. So then also the price difference between the healthy and the unhealthy foods should decline, making it easier, affordable to select healthy foods. I hope that has answered the question.
Thanks a lot, Saskia. And I think it's been very helpful how you pointed it out in a timeline. Maybe in an ideal world, we don't need food fortification, but we need those incremental steps, because right now we are striving for more diversification, more diverse diet, more diverse production. But maybe now we do need that fortification in order to bridge the gaps, basically. So that's been very, very useful. There was another comment from a question. We spoke a lot about local production, local consumption. That's also a term that is used in the voluntary guidelines, and even also in the in the recommendations from the International Conference on Nutrition that took place in 2015, so like more local food systems. And the question I'd like to ask to Kavita, and maybe also Reinhold could step in there, is local production, is that the same as sovereignty, or maybe food sovereignty? That was not the exact wording of the person who asked the question, but maybe you can shed your light on that comment. Kavita, maybe to you first, and then I ask Reinhold to step in as well.
Yeah, I think when we are talking about local, definitely we are talking about the farmers really growing a diverse range of crops, building on the local knowledge systems, bringing back traditional crops, which were really important, expanding the diet from focusing on, mainly rice, wheat, focusing on forgotten crops like millets, amaranthus, uncultivated greens, bringing them back into the diet. So it is looking at the local food culture, what was there, and trying to revive that so that people get nutritious food to eat. And local, it would vary. I mean, in terms of markets, it would be maybe the block level markets or the district level markets for fresh produce. But when we're talking about grains and cereals, farmers need an attractive price. So we may also be talking about urban markets, which are at some distance away from the farmers. So geographically also it is at different levels, depending on what produce one is focusing on.
Thanks a lot, and immediately an apology to Reinhold, because again you're speaking after Kavita. But before you step in, just one remark from my side. I really appreciated both Saskia and Kavita to maybe not use the word, but mention the use of the usefulness of food-based dietary guidelines that help people make healthier choices. And in the case of Kavita, these food-based dietary guidelines, when they have sustainability criteria, they definitely look at what is available locally and what is part of people's cultures. So it's really a tool that we can use, and a tool that is mentioned also in the voluntary guidelines that could help both producers, consumers, and policymakers head towards that direction, towards more sustainable food systems. Reinhold, over to you. Apologies.
I think, yeah, definitely with respect to the mention of food sovereignty, I guess there are two flavors to that concept. One is kind of a political connotation that does not particularly ring with some people, but there is the local community connotation. And I think with the current crisis of COVID, we have seen more of the risks associated with depending on external inputs that sometimes are not available or for whatever reason may be restricted. So definitely I see that there is a need for focusing on how can we strengthen circular economies at a local level and bring back and help expand not just the production of local products that are adapted to specific environmental challenges imposed by climate change and so forth, but also how can we generate more employment opportunities by transforming these foods with nutrition relevant fermentation processes and so forth, thinking about all the applications of using lactobacteria and so forth in so many traditional recipes that somehow have gotten lost in many places. And I think that it leads me to another connotation, that our this transformation that has to occur in such a short time, because we simply have run out of time, environmentally speaking and health speaking and so forth. This has to be driven by more than just information. I think we need to add to the push for consumer awareness or the brain. We have to add the tongues. And thinking about the food richness in India, in Peru, in Mexico, in Brazil, you know, there are certain food diversity and processing hotspots, if you want to call it that way, that have very high diversity. And we could and we need to focus on not just telling consumers, you should go to a local market and look for a healthy product that is low in pesticides and that has a low environmental footprint, water footprint, so forth. We, I think, need to motivate people from young age onwards to consume fresh products, hygienically processed, fermented products, and really to involve good recipes and tasty attractiveness. Because if you drive through any place in Latin America, and as in most other places, you are bombarded with misleading advertisements of huge panels that you see as soon as you get out of an airport, that push all kinds of food on you and drinks on you that are anything but healthy. But I do not see even a 1% of that marketing focusing on healthy foods, on the alternatives, on the local products. So clearly there needs to be an initiative, I think, that goes beyond just telling people what to do, just generating money. And this is maybe a final point that I consider as very critical also. In most places of Latin America now, you will see even poor families connected to the internet with whatever type of telephone, but it constitutes in many cases a percentage of the family expenditure that sometimes exceeds what they are spending on food, and or restricts the possibility to invest a bit more on food and less on some entertainment program or the prescription, of getting a certain access to entertainment. So that is a very strong conflict also that somehow we have to address, particularly with young people that tend to get trapped easily in a communication dependency or an entertainment dependency that becomes more important than focusing on food.
Yes, thank you. And also thanks for highlighting that importance again of local diversity, the richness that can be available locally, and creating a circular economy. Food education, nutrition education is central. But going back to your point of circular economy, and I'd like to go back with a question to Dr. Mandrevo from Ethiopia. I saw a comment in the list of questions that said something about in Bangladesh, you see sometimes that smallholder farmers have a lot of diverse production in their homestead gardens, but you see the problem of monotonous diets and lack of availability, lack of access to a diverse diet, more to the low and middle income urban dwellers. And since you alluded a little bit to the difference between rural and urban settings, maybe Dr. Mandrevo, you can share your thoughts with regard to this comment.
Thank you very much. Maybe I think this goes with a point that I mentioned in terms of changing the mindset of having what we have, even within our compound. Diversity at a household level, at a farmer's level, is that a solution for healthy diet? Is a critical question that we need to see very carefully. Taking farm as an enterprise, how much do we get from a specific land versus can we produce what we can consume on that land? These are two different things when we see it in terms of economics or as a farm, as a business enterprises. If the area is very much isolated and the farmers or the households, they don't have opportunity to exchange or to market their produce, and in exchange to get a diversified food stuff, then produce for food self-sufficiency is important. But taking farm towards transformation or benefiting from farm as an enterprise, the key question is not about diversifying what we grow, it's about to maximize profit per unit area. So I can grow wheat in all my plots, sell that, and in return I can get vegetables, fruits with a lesser, with a minimum expenses. This also goes with food sovereignty, which was commented earlier. So producing for myself and producing for market, I think we need to balance that very carefully. Again, diversity in terms of ecosystem, diversity for nutritious food is something different. Maybe Bangladesh can have a similar setup with Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, healthy diet touches both extreme poverty and rich people in terms of non-communicable problem. On this side is something to eat. So which one is a problem for me? Obesity and non-communicable disease at this particular time is not a major issue for Ethiopia. We have few individuals who do have that problem, but majority, 1/4 of the Ethiopian, they want food. So where do we invest most of our resources? We can be, our action could be guided, could be driven towards a healthy diet so that we can eliminate or we can avoid obesity and non-communicable disease, but our emphasis is about to produce a healthy commodity, healthy crop, either biofortified or process fortified. That's how I see, diversity. So take farm as an enterprise and produce whatever that can give maximum return. In return, changing the mindset to eat a balanced diet is important at the farmer's level. That's how I see the question.
Thanks a lot. This was even a more comprehensive answer than I had anticipated. But basically, what you emphasized in the beginning of your answer is that marketing, linking markets to farmers to markets, is extremely important in this context. Local markets, regional markets, to allow that livelihood to flourish and to develop, also for small, medium producers. So I would have liked to, ask all panelists for a one breath last message, but I'm afraid we are running out of time for that. So I would like to thank all the panelists. I really learned a lot again today. I think there was a a good direct and indirect reference to the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition that took place. And several elements of the guidelines were mentioned, were highlighted in your remarks. I saw that a few of the colleagues were so helpful pasting the link to the guidelines in the chat function, so you can quickly copy that and check the relevant sections of your interest. But I'd like to thank you, but also ask you, maybe instead of speaking out that last message for all the panelists, but also Saskia, the keynote speaker, and Julian Lampietti, to write that take-home message you would have otherwise told us in like 30 seconds, write it in the chat so that I can close from my side and hand over to Nancy Aburto, who is the Deputy Director of Nutrition in FAO, to help us say goodbye, but also summarize the event. Nancy, go ahead, and thank you for being with you.
Thank you, Stinica. You've given me a tough job because I only have a very few minutes to wrap up on a very robust conversation. Distinguished guests, speakers, panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure to have the opportunity to provide the wrap up and the closing of this event, which I find extremely relevant: Healthy Diets at the Nexus of Biodiversity, Climate, and Nutrition. Now, if you remember during yesterday's opening session of CFS Plenary 49, we were reminded right away that there are 3 billion people that cannot afford a healthy diet. There are 2 billion people that are overweight or obese, and as many as 811 million people who are hungry. But simultaneously, we recognize that our agri-food systems are generating 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions and that we're responsible for nearly 80% of biodiversity loss. Just to highlight 2 measures of the impact of our agri-food systems on our environment. Now, we're collectively facing a perfect storm of climate change, biodiversity loss, and malnutrition. And food is at the core of all 3 of these issues. To change our current situation, we need to reposition. We need to reposition variety and diversity of nutritious foods as central to healthy diets while promoting efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable food systems. Now, we started today with this excellent presentation by Saskia Depee from WFP, who showed us data around diets and their impact on nutrition outcomes and greenhouse gas emissions. She highlighted the need for diversity, and even Stinica came back to mention how often the word diversity was integrated in her remarks. Furthermore, she reminded us of the importance of considering country-level context while considering transformation of food systems for healthy diets and a healthy planet. Now, our panelists today then went on to highlight examples of policies and innovative action that can help to simultaneously address these challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, and malnutrition. Dr. Mendefro from Ethiopia gave us a great explanation of a holistic systems thinking with healthy diets as the goal and planning an approach of transformation, taking into account what can be done in the short, the medium, and the long term for durable solutions to address the needs of the population in his country. Dr. Kavita from India, she touched on the work that's being done with NGO partners in agroecology and nutrition, bringing us a real field level example of how diversity in farming can translate to diversity in diets, a real win-win. But she reminded us that this win-win doesn't come without systems thinking, because livelihoods must also be ensured through things like farmers' collectives, women's groups, market stability, and governmental policies that can help support all of the former. And finally, Dr. Reinhold spoke to us about biodiversity at all levels, reiterating those key points that were brought in from Kavita, showing us that how transforming our food systems needs to be context specific, but also showing us that solutions to support people and planet do have some key characteristics in common, and we can learn from each other as we have today. Now, this rich discussion in the panel points to the importance of carefully considering trade-offs in terms of health, environment, and social and economic impacts while we explore those solutions in our various contexts. Now, achieving our common goal of enabling healthy diets relies on partnership and engagement of all stakeholders across agri-food systems, from the custodians of ecological resources to the producers, the retailers, and all the way to the consumers. And I think we've touched on all of those constituencies today. So adopting an agri-food systems perspective can help broaden our critical dialogue to explore opportunities for partnership to address that triple threat of climate change, biodiversity loss, and malnutrition. Now, we discussed in addition today how the voluntary guidelines on food system and nutrition are a step in the right direction, as Reinhold phrased it. They provide a framework for the translation of evidence-based policy recommendations into tangible country-level action. And just this morning, the FAO launched the evidence platform, which has been developed in collaboration with UN Nutrition and with UN agencies. And it's a platform to collate and disseminate guidance, norms, standards, and evidence to support each of those 105 recommendations of the voluntary guidelines and can help facilitate their uptake at the country level. So I really encourage you all to continue exploring those voluntary guidelines. I saw a message in the chat of one of our colleagues here today that wasn't that familiar with them. So I encourage you to explore those guidelines and explore that newly launched evidence platform. I also encourage all of us collectively to continue engaging in this type of cross-sectorial dialogue and cross-sectorial collaboration so that we can ensure that evidence-based recommendations translate into these synergistic solutions and these transformative innovations across the agri-food system that can ensure healthy diet for today and for the future. So with that, I thank the keynote speaker, Saskia, and all of our panelists, as well as their colleagues in audiovisual services and those behind the scenes that made today possible. Thank you, thank you. And a sincere thank you to all of you who've shared your time with us today. It's a busy week, so I appreciate you coming to join us today. And I hope that you found this side event interesting and engaging as I did. And I hope you also found some inspiration to take forward efforts at the nexus of climate, biodiversity, and nutrition. So with this, colleagues, our event today has come to an end. I wish you all a good afternoon and a good evening. And if it's morning time for any of you, a very good day. Thank you all. Goodbye and take care.